which Thank you. Today's webinar, which is a moderated discussion on pharmacogenomics and contraceptive choice. And today we're going to talk about how a possible future is one where we could use a person's DNA to generate personalized predictions about contraceptive efficacy, side effects, and potential non-contraceptive benefits from each contraceptive method prior to its use. And this is just a possible future, so it's one we're kind of discussing today and trying to understand what would make it a real future and part of what we see going forward. But before we get started, just a few quick logistics. First of all, we are recording today's webinar, as you probably just saw, so that recording will be shared in a few days if you wish to go back to anything or share it with colleagues. And then just second is about our format. So I have a few questions I've already prepared for our panelists, and we'll spend a lot of the time going through those, but we also very much welcome and encourage your questions. So feel free to put those in the Q&A feature. That would be the most useful place to put them so we make sure we catch them. And I will try to roll those into the conversation as we go when I can. And if not, we've reserved about 15 or 20 minutes at the end for our audience question and answer. So please do keep the questions coming. That'll be very useful for us for this discussion. So with that, let me introduce myself. I see you all introducing yourselves in the chat. I wanted to pipe in. So my name is Megan Christofield. I'm a senior technical advisor for family planning at Jhpiego, where I largely focus on initiatives to expand method choice around the globe. I am trained in public health, and I am not a clinician, nor do I have any advanced training in genetics beyond what was covered in my basic science lectures in undergrad. So I say that in part to reassure folks who are on the line and a bit concerned with today's subject matter that we're really going to try and keep this talk accessible to everyone. So you do not need to have a PhD in genetics to be here today. We're hoping to be able to explain things in terminology that really works for folks so you can kind of understand this possible future. And to that note, if you have any questions about what's being explained, do pipe up and let us know what doesn't make sense so we can kind of elaborate further. Even though I don't have a background in this topic, I do consider myself a bit of a super fan of personalized medicine and its potential to contribute to a world where people thrive. So for the past few years, I've been tracking this precision medicine space and specifically its intersections with reproductive health and contraception. And when the CTI exchange asked if I'd share what's happening in this space, we thought, what better way than to bring some of these folks to the kind of proverbial stage so you could hear from them yourselves. So I'm super excited about that. And lastly, I just wanted to ensure folks knew what is the Contraceptive Technology Innovation Exchange that's hosting us today. So the CTI Exchange is a platform that's intended to grow the global contraceptive research and development ecosystem through collaboration and knowledge sharing like what we're doing right here today. If you haven't perused their website, I highly recommend you do. They've got a great series going on right now called Beginning with the End in Mind. And in it, they're featuring a number of perspectives on how we can keep the needs and voices of end users front and center in the design, evaluation, and introduction of new contraceptive products and services. So a lot of great stuff there to learn about, and highly encourage you to give it a visit. Okay, so enough from me for the moment. We're going to launch into a bit of a poll to get us started. So Ob Gyn, if you wouldn't mind launching the poll, we want to know who you are and what your background is so that we can tailor the conversation today towards you. So we're asking a poll here. So here we go. It should be on your screen. So how would you characterize your level of knowledge on today's subject matter? So we have 4 options. Some of you may find yourselves knowledgeable about contraception, but not about pharmacogenomics. Some are knowledgeable about pharmacogenomics and not about contraception. Some are knowledgeable about both. And maybe you are not really, you don't consider yourself knowledgeable on either, but you just wanted to be here. So that's fine too. This is just super helpful for us. So we'll give this a minute for folks to participate. Great, okay. We're at about 80% participation. Okay. All right, Ob Gyn, I think you can go ahead and close the poll and show the results. We've got about 85% participation, so consider this the majority. Okay, and let's share those results. Okay, so we're sharing now. So this is great, and I I hope the panelists can also see we've got most folks who are consider themselves knowledgeable about contraception, but not so much about pharmacogenomics. And then a few folks who fall into the other categories of some knowledge on pharmacogenomics, not family planning, and then some who are experts in both, which is great. All right, so with that, we can go ahead and stop sharing. And I am actually going to share my screen. Give me just one moment here. Okay. All right, you should be seeing my screen now. Okay, so I know most of you are knowledgeable about family planning, but for those who aren't, I just wanted to give a tiny little bit of context setting here just to bring all this together and to contextualize the discussion and what Erin and Kavita and Elena will be talking about. So to do this, I wanted to start with what are the global goals in family planning? How do we sort of orient ourselves just to give us this picture of what is really family planning about, right? And to do that, I've pulled the goal and result statement from FP 2030, which is the global partnership that really drives progress in family planning around the globe. And I just wanted to point out here that global goals in family planning really emphasize health, agency, and equality, and those being achieved through voluntary contraceptive use. So this idea that, you know, people can use contraception when they want it, they have the agency to do so, that systems are designed to be responsive to them in delivering those services, and that the policy environment is supportive of family planning. And just, you know, again, some context here that there are a broad range of contraceptive methods that exist. I'm not going to go through them all today, but I think it's helpful to kind of keep this in mind as we have our discussion, that there are many, many methods, and those methods vary across a few factors. I've named a few of them here. So they differ in duration, their level of effectiveness, whether or not they contain hormones, whether or not they're coital dependent, whether or not, or the level to which they have some kind of provider systems dependence for their use or their discontinuation, whether or not they afford any protection from STIs, and also the time it takes to return to fertility. So there's a lot of variation in the contraceptive method mix, and this is good, right? We see this as a good way to offer choice to people who want to use contraception, is to give them different ways to meet their contraceptive goals while considering the side effects and side benefits that come alongside their methods use. And around the world, there are 1 billion contraceptive users, which is really pretty remarkable. And there are also about 163 million people with unmet need for contraception, meaning they wish to space or limit their next pregnancy and are not currently using a contraceptive to do so. So this map is from a very recent publication in The Lancet just a couple weeks ago. And what it shows you is the proportion of demand satisfied. So this is, you know, the denominator here are people wishing to space or limit their next pregnancy, and the numerator are the ones using contraception to do so. So you can see that the blue here is largely where we're meeting demand for family planning, where that demand has been satisfied with the use of a contraceptive, the yellows and reds indicating much lower proportions of that demand being met. So I wanted to first bring that message to the fore, that there are huge pockets of unmet need around the world that need to be considered. But I actually wanted to bring another message out, which is that in the blue, we may want to question that in the settings in the blue that we're really meeting people's needs there as well, right? Because when we think about this measure of family planning, it's really just that if there's demand to space and limit someone's pregnancy, that they have a contraceptive to do so. It doesn't speak to that individual's experience, whether they like that contraceptive, whether it's really working for them in more of a lifestyle way. I think about myself and the fact that I'm on my 5th contraceptive, and I am, you know, a privileged white woman in America with great access to contraceptive care. And it really took me a lot of trial and error to get to the method I'm using. So while my demand has been met for many years, I don't know that I would say it was satisfactorily met most of those years. So just an indication that use is not satisfaction. And then finally, just as we're thinking about the complex challenges that exist in meeting our global contraceptive goals, I wanted to characterize a few things that are pretty consistently appearing in those challenges. So those on the line may have different ways to characterize these, but wanted to mention, you know, we have challenges in availing services and products to hard to reach populations still. We have restrictions on contraceptive access that appear in both policy and in normative ways. These, happen around age, around marital status, around proving one's fertility, right? So there's a lot of restrictions people face in accessing or using their contraception. We also have a pretty substantial level of contraceptive discontinuation among those who want to continue preventing pregnancy. We also have some level of contraceptive method failure. And then finally, just this context where contraceptive needs change over time. Family planning is a very dynamic experience for individuals where they at one time may need some type of contraceptive protection and over another time may decide they want to become pregnant, or the nature of their sexual encounters change, and so they want to change their contraceptive protection or not use it at all. And so just recognizing that you can't really meet someone's need and then sort of tick the box on that person. You really have to consider their needs over a lifetime. So these challenges demand really forward-looking solutions. And today we're going to talk about one of those solutions, which is about pharmacogenomics and contraceptive choice. And we're going to have this discussion to unpack the science, the likelihood for this technology, and also highlight some key work being done in this space. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce folks, and then hopefully you won't hear from me for a little while here. So first we have Aaron Lazorwitz. Aaron is a board certified OB-GYN. He completed his residency and his FP fellowship at the University of Colorado, and also has a master's in clinical science from the University of Colorado. And in addition to providing comprehensive reproductive health care, he also spends a large portion of his time involved in research activities to explore genetic differences and how they influence hormonal contraception. So to push his research towards real-world applications, he also serves as the chief medical advisor for Dama Health. Next, we have Elena Rueda Carrasco, and she is the CEO and co-founder of Dama Health, which is a femtech company helping women and clinicians to make safe and personalized contraceptive decisions through digital and genetic screening. Elena's academic background is in medical sciences and genetics from the University of Exeter, followed by a master's in innovation, entrepreneurship, and management from Imperial College London. And previous to founding Dama Health, Elena worked at Merck's Innovation Center, Germany, and in life science consulting. And then finally, we have Kavita Nanda, who is an obstetrician gynecologist and the director for medical research on the product development and introduction team at FHI 360. And her research focuses on contraception, HIV prevention, and the intersection between HIV and contraception globally. All right, so with that, I am going to close my screen share. Do that here. And I am going to kick off with a question to Aaron, to get us really started on what we're even talking about today. So Aaron, can you talk us through what is personalized medicine and pharmacogenomics? What are they? How are they being applied in clinical medicine broadly?
Of course. Thank you, Megan, for organizing this and the introduction and overseeing. So I'll kind of, given the majority of people don't know a lot about pharmacogenomics, we'll take a very broad approach. So precision and personalized medicine are often used together, and it's a broad concept of trying to treat patients individually. So no longer taking this is the one therapy to use for all patients. It's trying to incorporate individual differences into how we care for patients. And so part of that is pharmacogenomics, which is the idea that some of those individual differences are in our genetics. And we know that. We know everybody's genetics is different. And we have lots of differences in our DNA. And some of those differences seem to affect how drugs work. And so that's where the pharmaco comes from. This is specifically looking at how drugs affect the body in terms of efficacy, side effects, and toxicity. So some drugs work better for some people have worse side effects with certain drugs, and some people have really dangerous side effects. And so I like to bring up an example of, this is practical and real, and a good example of that is clopidogrel, which is a platelet inhibitor that we know there are genetic differences that cause the drug not to work as well in some people. And so there's been a lot of research in those who have heart attacks and need a coronary intervention. They have to be on a platelet inhibitor afterwards. Those with the certain, genetic variant that make clopidogrel not work as well are higher risk to have another heart attack. And so they're recommended to get a different treatment. And so my hospital and lots of hospitals across the across the US and even internationally are starting to implement those kind of pharmacogenetic research that we know and has been clinically proven. So that's kind of the hallmark of the best we can do is really showing that there's genetic differences that affect how a medication works. Now, there's lots of other research about side effects with different medications. And so for women's health and contraception, kind of the same principles could apply. Do genetic differences cause both how well the medicine works? So going back to efficacy that you brought up, and I think most importantly, side effects, because that is where we see such a huge variability in how different women interact with, have different side effects from different methods. And so that's kind of the bread and bones of how pharmacogenomics works, of really, we need to identify the genetic variations that cause these medications to work differently in different individuals. Then we can use those variations to guide contraceptive counseling and choice.
Yeah, it's really an incredible development. I remember talking to a colleague about this in the family planning space, and she was noting that her own child who had childhood leukemia, they had really done this same screening for him and were able to sort of target his cancer treatment based on his genetic profile, which is really incredible and such a promising thing, so it's cool to think about the applications elsewhere in health. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Why does this excite you as an OBGYN, and what potential applications do you see in this contraception and reproductive health space?
This really excites me because looking at how we've approached contraception for the last, 50 years has been a one-size-fits-all approach, right? We've been using the same hormones, the same drugs for a long time. The pill is still the most frequently prescribed method, at least in the US, and that's been around forever. Learning clinically when I was in residency, seeing patients getting these really bad side effects, being really dissatisfied with their contraceptive method and leading to discontinuation and unplanned pregnancies, it seemed like there was a problem that nobody wanted to address, that there wasn't a viable solution, that it was really just the trial and error method of try this method. If it doesn't work, we'll switch to something else, but we don't know how that's going to work for you. And so I'm most excited to see that, looking at other areas of medicine, that this can become practical and useful to help guide clinical practice. And that's kind of the future I envision, is that one day we can use these genetic differences in combination with personal preferences, other things that are really important for individualized medicine, to really give a more individualized contraceptive recommendation so that we can avoid side effects, or at least, patients could know what side effects they're at higher risk for and have better expectations about it. And then there's also the potential for newer contraceptive methods in the future. There's genetic research going on there, kind of unrelated, but it's going to open up the opportunity for both doing better with what we have and finding better solutions in the future as well.
Yeah, and I think about like my own experience of trial and error, and I know this is a really common one. I've heard about this from friends, from family, from colleagues, from the data, right? That people really oftentimes have to try something else, keep switching. They kind of wonder, is this effect normal? Is this effect expected? Why did my friend have this one great side benefit of her menses stopped? She stopped bleeding. She had amenorrhea when she used a hormonal IUD, but I didn't. And I want that, right? And so I can kind of imagine that being able to have that data in advance would really change the way that we make decisions about contraception and about other kind of healthcare in our lives. Could you tell us a little bit about the research you've been doing in this? I know you are I think everyone considers you the world's leading researcher in this space, and it's really exciting what you're doing. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I first approached this problem from the aspect of saying, well, let's look at it from what other people have done. And so really I looked at the other pharmacogenomic research that had been done, what were the key genetic targets they looked at for that research, and then tried to duplicate some of that with hormonal contraceptive implant users, so Nexplanon users. I chose the Nexplanon because it has a very high uptake in my patient population in Colorado. And it's really nice to study because it releases a steady amount of hormones. So you don't have to worry about people missing their pills, not taking it. Everybody who's got an implant in, we know it's there. We know it's it's working. And so we looked at, do these kind of high yield targets affect the amount of drug in the individual system? So they, because people have different metabolism, right? And so are they metabolizing the drug differently? And what are the side effects they're experiencing? And so we found a couple interesting targets, but really the biggest thing I took away from that first study was that these high yield targets didn't yield the results we thought they were going to be. So say, the metabolic enzyme that's really important for clopidogrel and other drugs, the CYP2C19, didn't seem to have any effect here. It's not important when looking at least that progestin hormone. And so that told me we need to take a much bigger approach, which is the research I'm working on right now. So a much larger study, still of implant users to kind of get this foundation built, but looking at the whole genome. So doing genome-wide sequencing and genotyping to kind of identify new targets for future research as well. So that's kind of where we're at in really figuring out what's important and what's going to be useful for future investigations as I hopefully go beyond the implant as well. That's kind of the key next steps, is once we identify the targets we're interested in, going to pills and things more commonly used, and then even branching off to IUDs and things like that. And that's kind of how this will have to work, is getting a foundation of the knowledge and then starting to build upon it with repetition and validation. And everybody calls me like the leading expert, but a lot of that is because not many other people are doing the research, which I want to change. I want hopefully more people to be inspired to do the research and to help me and help everybody in this area, because that's the only way we're going to make real progress, is doing the studies in multiple different populations, different ethnic and racial makeups, different methods, and really finding things that are consistent across the board. That's kind of how we're going to get the evidence we need to say this is a definitive association. This is something we can actually use for clinical practice.
Yeah, Erin, and I'm reflecting on, I've done the 23andMe at-home DNA test. For those who are not familiar, it's, an at-home test. You spit in a tube, you mail it in, and then you, after they sequence you, you get this incredible interface platform where you can explore your genetic results. You can look at your likelihood of acquiring certain conditions and many different things. You wouldn't even imagine some of this. I think it predicted that I would like vanilla ice cream better than chocolate based on my genetic profile. Truly, it says that in my report. But what's exciting from the perspective you're speaking of is there actually now are reports in there. For me, I can open my app and see some pharmacogenomic reports. It'll tell me, a couple drugs it thinks I might metabolize quicker than the average person, right? And so I think what you're saying is that there is this potential to do that for contraception, perhaps, but it relies on a lot of data to be able to confidently make those assertions. Is that right? You're really talking about being able to just really look big and be able to hone in on targets.
Yeah, no, the ideal is like what you mentioned, getting these associations so validated, so proven that they can be incorporated into commercial products, to really anything that's genetic testing. It takes a while though. If you look back to the ones that are in 23andMe, the research on that started 20 years ago. And so unfortunately, we're a bit behind when it comes to contraception and women's health. So we got a lot of catching up to do, but fortunately, we can also build upon what's been done before, and there's newer technology now. There's lots of advantages, but we're still definitely behind a lot of other areas of medicine. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for just ground truthing us a little bit there. So I'll know my ice cream before my ideal contraceptive match. Excellent. Well, Elena, let me turn to you, since you're kind of in this business space, right? You're looking at this from an entrepreneurial mindset, which I really, really love. So could you walk us through this ideal sort of end state that you envision for applying personalized and precision medicine approaches to contraceptive choice?
Absolutely. Can you hear me properly? I didn't do a sound check. Perfect. Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to echo a lot of what Aaron was saying, but really the ideal end state that at least we're really trying to get to and achieve is removing this whole one size fits all approach and kind of subjective recommendations that each individual clinician might have maybe towards one specific form of contraception or another, and really start putting the patient in the center, really start to understand like holistically, what is this patient's preferences, what is their medical history, what are their genetic side effects and risk predispositions, and how can we make the best recommendation for that patient then and there. And obviously, I mean, to get it to every clinician and clinic in the world or, in the States, that's going to take a lot of time. That's going to take a lot of training, money. And so I think we can start doing these things with the aid of technology. Essentially, there's so many areas where we're already using algorithms and we're using, technology to be able to kind of help the human brain and try and put all of these factors down in a way that is computed way more fast than any human would be able to do that. And more than anything, start actually educating women and females around their options as well, because I think a lot of the time, women and females, they don't have much education on what options they have. It's just word of mouth. It's what maybe your mom recommended you, what your friends are telling you, but you really have no idea in terms of what you're gonna react to. And then starting to educate by really asking the right questions and helping women understand and females understand what should they be observing, that can then help really make a good recommendation. And I think identifying any triggers early and looking for the signs, and that all takes education as well. So hopefully trying to move towards this personalized medicine approach is really where I would see the ideal state. And finally, really, we have such differences in demographic and ethnicity and around the world. And unfortunately, clinical practice has not always embedded that. And so a lot of the time what we read in publications and just past research has really, not included a huge subset of the population, which I think really needs to change to be able to put patient first.
I really love your vision, and I appreciate that it really comes from a place of the most informed user, right? You're looking at this from an entrepreneurial perspective, but it's really because you want the informed user to be that endpoint, and you're trying to find solutions towards that. And so I also appreciate you talking about how there's sort of a pathway that involves education and a lot of things before even the full technology is in place. And so thank you for that. And I am curious if you could just elaborate a little on what led you to co-found Dama Health, and what is it? What do you hope to deliver? Talk to us about that.
Absolutely. Well, I think you touched on it before, Megan, but I think it came from personal experience, having to really trial and error a bunch of different forms of contraception, and then living with 5 different women in my undergrad of university, and doing studies myself on pharmacogenomic and epigenetic changes of drugs. But I was looking specifically at schizophrenic drugs at that point in time, and just really starting to wonder why is there no publication? Why is there no research in actual hormonal medication, especially when there's, millions of people on this form of medication? And then honestly being really inspired by Aaron's research. So I reached out to Aaron a couple of years ago, and I had been kind of exploring the idea from a commercial side, because I completely understood the need. Spoke to so many people, so many kind of women and females, just to validate, is this actually a problem for you? Are you seeing the same thing? And it was just so clear that there's a huge market for this, because we're not really at the the optimal space just yet in the way that we are kind of prescribing hormonal medication and contraception specifically. And it then got to the point where Aaron and I were talking. I wanted to really start bringing this to scale, and how do you do that? So we started working on exploring different tools, looking at other health tech companies, what are they using, what is the market shifting towards, and really finding a gap here. So there isn't really a lot going on in the contraception space now more than ever in the last 5 years, which is really encouraging. But we started then, Dama Health is actually creating screening tools. So we use digital screening and algorithms that ask the women, what are your preferences, what have you tried in the past, and how can we learn from that? Kind of an Amazon recommendation, what have you shopped for in the past, and how can we then make a good recommendation for what you want to buy? But really looking obviously at the medical factors, and then also using the latest research, so stuff like what Aaron is doing, what other researchers are looking into, and trying to just bring that into the way that we recommend contraception, so you don't have to always see the most specialist OBGYN out there to be able to get this recommendation. And I think that's really also the vision that, you know, Aaron also had, like how can I get my research and, you know, impact as many patients as possible, and really it's not waiting for maybe, you know, the government and academia to put funding into it, but maybe, you know, startups and private companies can start putting resources themselves to also encourage research to move by showing, you know, the market that there is a huge need. And so yeah, Dama Health has been around only for a year. We're now doing some studies. We're really validating the algorithms and the recommendations, and ideally women and females will be able to do the test at home and then utilize those insights to be able to go to the clinic, speak to the doctor and know the things to ask, really feel empowered in that 15-minute, 10-minute decision making, rather than completely, you know, change the process and get every OBGYN in the country to know to approach it this way. So yeah, that's really the vision of Dhamma. And hopefully we're starting off with contraception, but really we want to be able to help women throughout their hormonal cycles and throughout their like reproductive life. And maybe this can end up in also supporting with menopause and, you know, replacement therapies, hormone replacement therapies, because once you know the genetic predispositions and traits for something like contraception, it's applicable to IVF, to hormone replacement therapy, because we're dealing with the same hormones and similar compounds. Obviously research needs to be done in that space too, but that's really kind of the excitement that we have in really trying to translate all of that and take it to the patient directly.
Yeah, this is super exciting, and I really applaud you for kind of building a company that can actually respond to the emerging findings, right? To saying, let's start with how do we personalize based on experience, people's experience of contraception so far, but also as the research and evidence are generated, start to kind of feed that into your technology so that it gets more and more precise and really builds that incredible future that I think at least those of us on the panel are imagining and would love to see come to life. I'm going to move on to Kavita for a moment, and then we'll kind of come back, and I've already seen a few questions coming in that I would love to direct to folks. But Kavita, I wanted to talk to you as someone who has a deep background in product introduction and product research in the contraceptive space, and particularly, you know, your work spanning the globe, looking especially in low and middle income countries. So I wanted to hear from you, what do you see, or do you see a potential for pharmacogenomic evidence to be applied maybe even further upstream into the development of new contraceptives, right? This solution Elena and Aaron are talking about, we've talked about so far really in the, you know, contraceptive decision making, but FHI 360 is doing tons of contraceptive research and development. Is this something that could be applied upstream up there?
Yeah, in fact, you know, we're fairly new to this pharmacogenomic area, but it's something that I at least have been thinking about for a long time. Finally, hopefully getting to do some actual research in this area, but we have just started a new pharmacogenomic initiative with our new contraceptive trials. And for those not familiar with our work, we in the PDI, or Product Development and Introduction Group, we develop new contraceptives, and our work spans all the way from preclinical development to post-marketing contraceptive evaluation. We're currently launching a couple of phase 1 trials as well as a phase 3 trials. And our phase 1 trials focus on pharmacokinetics and safety. Safety is not so much of an issue for our pharmacokinetic phase 1 trials because we use existing active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs. So our trials currently use etonogestrel, which is in Nexplanon that Aaron referenced, as well as medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is in DMPA. But we use novel delivery methods or new ways of product administration. And we think it's important to begin to develop a biorepository of PG specimens from our trials so that we can further inform both our own method development, but also future research, future collaborations with others working in this space. So for example, you know, we are interested to know whether certain genetic polymorphisms could affect contraceptive PK or side effects such as bleeding in our early phase trials. And this could potentially help inform our further method development and potentially dose selection. For our later phase trials, and I mentioned the DMPA, so one of my colleagues, Vera Halpern, is currently launching a trial of DMPA XT, which is looking at an existing DMPA product, but administering it subcutaneously. And so in this study, this is a multi-country study that includes South Africa. And there are very limited data from South Africa on pharmacogenomics. And so this study could inform just the general, what variants are seen and help inform that space, but also those data could then be used to see whether any, genetic variants affect contraceptive effectiveness of this particular product. Potentially, we could also look at the effects of variants on other things. For example, there are certain genetic variants recently that have been shown to be associated with osteoporosis and fractures. And as you all know, there's some risk of lower BMD, bone mineral density with Depo-Provera, DMPA. And so potentially, this information could look and see, well, which women might be susceptible to lower BMD or fractures, looking at that cross section. And further on in drug development, as part of our FDA approval process, we'll be looking at drug-drug interactions. And so it's important not only to look at genetic variants that impact contraceptive metabolism, but also those that impact other drugs that might be used with the contraceptive. So a long time, one of my interests has been looking at drug-drug interactions, and a lot of the HIV, the antiretrovirals, interact with contraceptives and may cause, lower contraceptive effectiveness, for example, efavirenz. And some of the work that has been done has shown that women who are slow metabolizers of efavirenz, for example, are the ones who are more likely to get this drug interaction, potentially. So it's important to look at variants associated with these other things, either conditions or other medications that might be used, particularly in areas where we work, where women may be taking drugs for HIV, for malaria, for something else as well. Also, we hope that because we are studying current APIs, that this work will also help inform current method users eventually, current method, current DMPA users, not necessarily related to this trial if we find something that's associated with decreased effectiveness, for example. It's too bad we recently completed this, 8,000 women study, the ECHO study, to see whether contraceptives impact the risk of HIV acquisition. And, it was designed many years ago, so we weren't thinking about this. But if we had had permission to use blood specimens to look to see whether pharmacogenomics somehow affected that relationship, that would have been a useful thing to do. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Kavita. And I think you've really given us a rich perspective on how this type of data, when collected, can help us answer a lot of those really persistent questions that appear in our goal or our objective of achieving universal family planning access, right? And helping people meet their contraceptive goals. And certainly those interactions and side effects and everything are really common topics. And so I really appreciate the work you all are doing to now collect more data. And I saw Aaron nodding along, because I'm sure he's also happy to hear there's more data that we'll be able to kind of triangulate and better understand the potential here. Kavita, I also wanted to talk to you as a product introduction leader about, over the course of your career, you've really witnessed a lot of products that have succeeded, not succeeded, and probably have a good understanding of what those factors of success are. So I just wanted I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the factors you think should be considered as this concept moves from kind of evidence generation to development to introduction, what pitfalls should be avoided, especially as we consider the applicability of something like this in low and middle income countries.
So I think, you asked me what will it take. So first of all, I think it's important to collaborate with other researchers interested in this topic from the areas in which we work. So it would be really important to collaborate with groups and LMICs. That's something we hope to do. We have a new, with our new initiative, we hope to develop collaborations and also perhaps capacity building for this. And that all, of course, takes funding. Although the costs of these genetic tests have decreased, we need funding for clinical studies, for specimen collection, for biorepositories, for researchers' time, as well as the testing itself. And all of this should be done in collaboration and hopefully with some type of capacity building in the areas where we would work. Unfortunately, there are minimal data on pharmacogenomics in LMSCs, and this is accompanied by high genetic diversity. And so some of the tests that are developed for high-income countries that are developed on Europeans might not even be useful. If, forget cost and access issues, they might not be relevant. For example, this is not my area, but I understand that there's recent PT testing available for some antiretrovirals such as abacavir, but that specific mutation might not be relevant, and also that drug is not used first line in low and middle income countries. And so it's important that the research both be relevant and also capture the genetic diversity of these areas. And then of course, costs, accessibility, and equity is always an issue. And with contraceptives, but also with these personalized medicine tools, potentially.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, I wanted to make one more point, sorry. The last point I wanted to make is that I think it's great to have tools that will help users make informed choices, but it would be really important to make sure that these tools don't then lead to being barriers to access. You know, we don't want providers saying, oh, you can't get that implant because your genetic testing shows X, Y, and Z. WHO has worked for years to work on the WHO MEC or medical eligibility criteria, which is designed to improve access. Women in the past were denied methods because they had hypertension or other medical conditions. And it would be really important that pharmacogenomic tests, when available, should allow users to make informed decisions, but not limit access, unless there were severe safety concerns, for example.
Yeah, such a great point, Kavita, about you know, really building this for the liberation of access and not as a further barrier to care, and certainly one to keep in mind. I also just appreciate your comments about, you know, your comments really have this tone of we do need to begin with the end in mind, right? Which is the series that CTI Exchange has organized this around, is thinking about what are those features, what are the things that we want to keep our eyes on as we develop new technologies and try and make them available to the masses. So I'm going to turn now to our audience Q&A, and we have a number of questions already. So I'm not sure if folks have seen them yet, but let me start. I'm actually going to start with at least one or two for Elena, if you don't mind. I'll start with one from Lenita. She asks, you know, Elena, you mentioned the importance of epigenetic changes and differences in addition to pharmacogenomic differences. So are the tools to differentiate epigenetic influences becoming more widely available?
So, I mean, we're starting from, you know, from the beginning here with a lot of the studies because of how much data is still lacking. And absolutely, I mean, epigenetics will obviously have a huge impact, but we haven't actually started doing research in the epigenetic space yet. So anything that we can start applying from the epigenetic side still needs to be validated further. And I mean, we're starting off as well as a company looking at like full genome sequencing, but I think it's still an area that there is absolutely like to barely no research on epigenetic changes of contraception, unfortunately, but we see epigenetic changes in all areas of medicine and kind of drugs in general. So absolutely, this would be kind of the next step if we can get, you know, first, and it all has to do with cost again. You know, you have to provide a kit, a panel that is easily accessible to women. Otherwise, it's not a model that works. People cannot access it. And I think obviously adding the epigenetic side of things would expand that panel. And so it's really, from our perspective, that needs to be a decision that we make commercially once we understand really like how strong the associations are with epigenetics. But yeah, like everything, it would be an amazing place to start also looking into, because your environment, what you eat is really triggering a lot of how hormones in general interact with your body. So we definitely do see a huge potential there.
Awesome, thanks for that. And then I also just wanted to ask, there's a clarifying question here about Dama Health. About, you know, are you already actively making recommendations to people about what contraceptive methods to try? And if so, if you can talk a little bit more about what that looks like and how it works.
So we haven't gone to market yet. So we're at the stages of beta testing, kind of really trialing and doing internal and external research with some academic groups. But what we do, I can tell you a little bit about the process. It actually at the moment, we haven't incorporated the genetic side into the recommendations, but we have a database of contraceptive options all available to women in the UK at the moment. So we follow the MEC guidelines, everything that is accessible for UK patients. And it takes a woman around 6 to 7 minutes to fill out the full kind of questionnaire form. We then collect 80 different variables and data points on that woman, run our internal algorithms, and are able to recommend the top 3 recommendations. And this is very much based on how good, the data is that we have on the back end. And so to really validate that and to be able to commercialize that further, we're still in the kind of research stages. And then kind of the next step commercially would be to validate the genetic panel and add that as a supplement add-on to identifying any risks, predispositions. The same way you said, Megan, your 23andMe can give you some information. And then obviously how we then guide the decision making and incorporate the clinician into that is a huge part of it.
Yeah, I love that holistic perspective, because you're right, it's not just about the DNA. Personalized care has so many other elements that are taken into account, and that you're building a solution that sort of recognizes all of that. I'm going to move on to a question to Erin. I think this one is actually listed to Kavita, but I want to get Erin's take on it first, and then Kavita, feel free to add in. So our colleague Rashmi asks whether or not we see pharmacogenomics or pharmacogenetics being able to identify folks who will have, might be the ones to have that delayed return to fertility following hormonal contraceptive use. Like, we know there's a long contraceptive tail on injectable contraceptive for some women. Is that the type of solution you see this answering at some time?
Yeah, I definitely want Dr. Kavita's opinion as well, but I think that's an area where pharmacogenomics may reveal information we haven't known previously and could help explain why it is so different. It could be related to metabolism, but there's also a lot of other factors in how the injectables work and how long ovulation is suppressed that I definitely think, if we can get enough users and enough information, that we could start to unravel some of those differences and why, maybe some of those genetic variations that explain why people have such a delayed return to fertility. And again, then once we understand that, improve the counseling of what, and I want to reemphasize a point that Dr. Kavita brought, that we never want it to be inhibitory, right? We want these still of more just information for patients and for women to better inform their decision making. So even if, say, a patient does have a delayed return to fertility, that doesn't mean injectables are off the table. More of just, I want to be able to tell my patients, you should expect this is going to last this long, and so that if they're planning to get pregnant in the future, they're not disappointed.
Right, delivering it in the context of a really good healthcare, a right-sized healthcare interaction. Yeah, absolutely. Kavita, did you want to add?
Yeah, so this is something we do hope to look at. So in our later phase trials, we will be looking at return to ovulation. We don't often look at return to actual pregnancy, return to fertility, but we do look at return to ovulation. And so we will be hopefully able to inform that question with our data.
Great, thanks for that. So I'm now going to shift to another kind of theme in the questions. I saw this one coming, and I knew we were going to need to answer this today. So I've hopefully given a few minutes for each of you if you want to comment a little bit on this question about what is the applicability, what is the reality, what will it take to make innovation like this available in low middle income countries specifically. So I know we have questions here from Dr. Afolabi. For those who don't know him, he is the head of reproductive health at the Ministry of Health in Nigeria, and I'm sure has a lot of thoughts on this. We have a few others who've asked it as well on and offline, and so I just wanted to hear, is this something we can make available everywhere? What would it take? How can we sort of not only imagine this incredible future that we're already starting to create in the UK and elsewhere, but think of it globally? And I'll invite anyone to answer that. Also, if folks want to type in answers who are our participants, please also contribute. We'd love to move that discussion forward.
Megan, I can start quickly just from the US perspective. Even in the US, even the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper, but it's still cost prohibitive, and it can be quite expensive. And so at least here, it's been a institutional kind of hospital-based initiative that the hospital is creating a biobank of their patients where they get the genetic testing as just part of care, and then that's incorporated into recommendations as, say, patients get prescribed a specific medication. So that is one way to keep the costs kind of less prohibitive. You don't put the cost on the patient, you put it on the institution and the system. Now that's still quite a bit of cost, and I'm definitely not a global health expert. I'm not going to say what would work internationally, but that at least has kind of been the push here, is take it from an institutional perspective of saying the hospital will save money by avoiding side effects and bad outcomes by incorporating this into care. And I think that is one way to approach it that might be a little bit more reasonable.
It's a great case right there. I mean, yeah, return on investment. Other thoughts, Kavita, Elena?
Yeah, I mean, I think for low and middle income countries that works great for one hospital, but it wouldn't work for the areas where I work. We would need, a low cost, easy to use, easily accessible test. And you would need buy-in from providers, Ministry of Health, from contraceptive users. The test would have to be relevant for that population. And that's going to take, I think, many years of work. This is just the very beginning, at least for contraception. We're just, at least from our point of view right now, we're trying to collect the data so that hopefully in the future, there could be a cheap commercial test that could be used to help users make informed choices. But I think it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, kind of echo that. I mean, we're starting from one point now with kind of digital and kits being sent at home, but it's not really tackling, I guess, the middle to low income countries. But I think it's a place to start, in countries where the political landscape might be tense and, you cannot be seen walking into a sexual health clinic. For example, this is a starting point. In some countries, this is a way that women can and females can, get that access that otherwise would not be available if they can actually have an interface where is a bit more private. Again, they're able to do it in their home somehow. And I mean, through COVID, just kind of having remote and digital options helps. But absolutely, like Kavita saying, you're going to have to make a product that is very different depending on the demographic in terms of, where are they getting their information from design to, do people use mobile phones? Do they have reception? Do they even have a postal code that can be and I think it's very project specific, very geography specific. And I think you do, I'm talking more from the commercial space, you do need people understanding that geography to be able to, either get a product to market there, or essentially build like a company from scratch for that specific kind of group of people. And I think, unfortunately, we haven't even made it happen yet in places like the States and the UK, but hopefully we can really learn and through technology actually speed up the process. So it's not something that gets delivered to other geographies in like 10 years, 20, but rather like kind of 5, 6, as things are accelerated. And maybe companies like ours will at some point be able to subsidize, being able to get it to other geographies, because of the amount of the knowledge and the data, the crowdsourcing of that information is so valuable for research as well. If companies see the value in that and that's something they want to incorporate, I think would be very powerful.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just wanted to pull on a theme I heard a little earlier in the conversation and ask each of you if you wanted to weigh in. It's this idea that, you've all indicated that this is an advance that's happening in various parts of healthcare in various countries. It's happening with clopidogrel, it's happening in oncology, it's happening in so many parts of care. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is again and again that women's healthcare, reproductive healthcare is a little behind the times. So any kind of final thoughts from you on like how we can move this forward? What would it take to really shorten that timeline, like you said, Elena, of this not being something that happens in 2050 or 2060, but something a little sooner? Is there anything you'd ask for or assert is needed? Aaron, start with you.
Sure. Kind of just re-emphasize what I said before. I need help. I can't do this research all by myself. I don't want to do it all by myself because that's going to take too long. I want to see other people out there doing it. And other organizations. I've talked with Kavita about, their initiative, and it's phenomenal. That's what we need. We just need people who are already doing contraceptive research and contraceptive work starting to think about this. And that's kind of where the progress is going to be sped up, is the collaborations, multiple people approaching this from different perspectives, and coming together to really make it work and speeding things up. Yeah, that's really, I want everybody to do this research and be part of it. I think it'd be great to have as big of a community as we can.
Thanks, Erin. Kavita, anything from you?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that we have leadership from people like Dr. Erin, who's been working on this. So, we're very interested in collaborating with him, but also collaborating with others. And I think it would be great if other entities involved in contraceptive development were also interested in this. And so that's something, we hope to help facilitate, but it always takes money. And so we'll be seeking funding to make this happen, at least in terms of a biorepository and in terms of developing this whole contraceptive pharmacogenomics initiative in the next few years. And then it also, takes people like Elena who are willing to, take this and make this a commercially viable test that's easy to use for women, females.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kavita. Elena, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think, it's encouraging to see that I think the patients, the women, the females are now really starting to make noise. It's becoming really like a social movement. And that is, I think, one of the biggest market shifts that we're seeing. People are speaking out loud. People are no longer just accepting in silence. And I think that's a huge starting point to actually get the wider market, the wider research space to open their eyes as well. And I think, it's been really great to be able to, in a way, educate women, like pharmacogenomics is an option, like it's not so far in the future, and really to start to, I think the way we're trying to help the space is really to, make it, just educate the women, and also, talks, deliver information, and really also go to investors and actually, make noise so that they can start investing more in this space. And I think in order to make the biggest impact, it's an ecosystem. It's people like Aaron, Kavita, and private and entities, as well as, NGOs, all working together, because there's a massive gap to fill. And I think we're building a company which uses research as the base. And I think because, and we work with academia, because I don't think a private institution could do it alone. And, a research institution could do it alone either. There's so much to learn from each other in this space. And so, yeah, I hope that, in the next 5 years, we can, women will just not be accepting of just kind of what's given to them, because they're more educated to be able to speak their voice. And I think that is the big movement happening at the moment.
Yeah, no, this is perfect. What a great note to end on. Making noise is such a great clarion call here, and hopefully folks can collectively make that noise and collaboratively do so and really demand better, because certainly we do deserve better when it comes to our contraceptive choices and the ability to get the right fit right away. So thanks everyone for joining. Emily dropped a few links in the chat to the CTI exchange, and they're beginning with the End in Mind series. We'll share a recording shortly. I want to send a huge thanks to Emily and Ob Gyn for all of their support in organizing this and hosting us on the CTI exchange. And of course, a thank you to Erin, Kavita, and Elena for joining today and sharing your knowledge on this topic and your perspective. Thanks everyone so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for creating a space for us to communicate this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say one last thing before we forget. We've talked about women and females, but we can't forget male contraception. And so, there's been a lot of work in male contraception, and it would be important to incorporate pharmacogenomics in that work as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kavita. Yeah, you got a little celebratory icon there from someone. So thanks. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.